Hi there. I am so glad to be here today. My name's Heidi Araya, and I'm an innovation product manager and senior consultant with Adaptavist. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be sharing a story of an approach I have been working on to help companies transition to Agile successfully. The 4 facets of agility, a pragmatic path to Agile transformation success. So why am I here today sharing my story? I was lucky enough to be hired as a government contractor at NASA to rescue a waterfall project that had delivered vaporware, and we used Scrum to regain trust with the customer. That app was in production for almost 8 years with barely any defects before finally being retired. Since then, I've been heavily involved in helping many companies, both as an employee and a consultant, adopt and scale Agile ways of working. These companies ranged from a small startup that grew from 30 to 220 people to 100-year-old enterprises with over 200,000 employees worldwide, and from a financial services startup to cybersecurity company and many other companies in between. So I'm now working as an innovation product manager and a transformation consultant at Adaptavist. And I do what I do so I can help others break free from this organizational angst and come to work feeling happy and fulfilled every day. So when you're thinking about my journey over the past 10 years or so, each company was slightly different as they were trying to transition to Agile, but they all had one thing in common. In every single case, people in these companies had an incomplete picture of what it took to actually be Agile. And they didn't know they were missing these key components for success. Many of them had called in consultants who imposed rigid frameworks upon them, or they conversely saw it simply as a team-level process change that wouldn't really impact them at all. Many of these teams and companies already had so-called Agile teams in place, using common Scrum or Kanban frameworks or mix of Agile practices. However, when I took a closer look, the teams didn't have the tools or the support they needed, or leadership would not support self-organizing teams and viewed Scrum as a new process to deliver requirements to teams that didn't need to involve customers or feedback. And along my journey, I also discovered unhappy people being forced to perform rote practices as individuals instead of being able to work as a team to produce something amazing together. And instead of giving people more autonomy, as the principles of Agile say, people often have less and less say in their daily work, all because management wants to be able to easily measure team outputs instead of outcomes. In fact, they don't know what they should be measuring, so oftentimes just come up with something silly like story points per developer because they feel the need to know what people are doing instead of focusing on whether customers like what's been delivered or not. People aren't taking the time to improve their ways of working at all because they're too busy to stop and learn. And I heard that again just the other week. We're struggling. We're way too busy to send this person to a workshop for 2 days. The fact is that most people don't understand all the changes that need to happen in the organization to encourage agility. And this causes massive disengagement among people in organizations today. So if you're looking at the slide, it's probably not a shock, especially to those of you who have worked in larger organizations trying to transition to Agile or one trying to scale up their processes. What I'm going to show you is how to use a new concept to approach your Agile transformations, and hopefully it will help you as it's been helping us. As I was thinking through the various challenges that I'd encountered over the years, wondering why does no one have a complete picture of all the things that need to be thought through, and why do so few people in leadership see the value in Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, and why doesn't anyone consider the Agile mindset, instead viewing transformations as forcing others by command and control, which is opposite the Agile mindset? It hit me one day. Executives haven't experienced Agile like I have firsthand, working on the ground floor inside teams and then at all levels up to the C-suite, trying to guide Agile adoption. And that's when I came up for this idea for expressing the different facets of Agile: complexity thinking, people and leadership, technical and cultural practices, and tools and automation. And guess what? These 4 facets have been resonating with people because they now have a way to focus on these different facets during an Agile transformation. For example, maybe the tools aspect is working well, but teams need to work more cohesively together. Or maybe leadership doesn't have an idea about the Agile mindset, or perhaps teams need to understand how to write user stories or begin using automation. It's one thing to be relentless about continuously improving the processes by which work gets done. And it is quite another, and every bit as necessary, to be relentless about continuously improving the people who do the work. And when you do that, it's called a deliberately developmental environment. And we realize that's our goal with these 4 facets. So we started approaching our proposals and our client work this way. And while no model is perfect, of course, finally we had an approach that was resonating with customers and consultants alike. They don't cover every single area of an Agile transition, of course. It's a way to think about the various themes that businesses will need to focus on during their Agile transformation to create an organization that will improve its people, culture, and its processes. So the first facet is called complexity thinking. Complexity thinking is key for today's changing world, right? It has to do with creativity, critical thought, and logic. It relates to our ability to use new approaches to address sticky, new, unsolved, complex problems. So how does this relate to product development in organizations today? Complexity thinking frameworks are designed for the kinds of complex changing challenges and goals we are trying to achieve in today's ever-changing world. We face new challenges in our work like nonlinear relations, emergence. And because of this, we can't plan in detail too far ahead like we may be used to in the past. We must expect change, especially through inputs, feedback, market changes, and our processes must be empirical so we can flex and adapt as we learn. That's the goal of complexity thinking. Some of the things that you might come across in your complexity thinking is Scrum, design thinking, OODA loop, Scrum at scale, for example, and any framework or way of working that's built for inspecting and adapting that falls into this category. By the way, this graphic depicts this Alistair Coburn's Heart of Agile concept. Other people might use the word processes for this facet, but the idea of complexity thinking really does embed the mindset of dealing with a much different world than we're used to, and the word process just doesn't cover that. Many companies have already identified frameworks they want to use. The question I then ask is, what problem will this framework solve for you? And what are your goals with using this framework? It's important to identify the challenges you're experiencing now as well as some goals so you can identify how you will know you're improving. After all, it's not about the framework. It's about how to adapt to complex and changing times and remain adaptable and resilient. And that leads to success as a business. Processes must serve the needs of the organization so that the company is able to survive and thrive in an uncertain world. I actually asked someone not too long ago why their company wanted to do an agile transformation. And he actually said, I don't know, I'll have to get back to you. Turned out that his boss didn't know either. It was just something the CIO said we have to do. Without knowing why and communicating to everyone what will happen if we don't do this, it's a recipe for failure. The actions are important, but the mindset behind it even more important. So here's what we recommend. We work with our clients to embed complexity thinking in their organizations through workshops and hands-on work rather than only giving training. We have found that working directly with people in their day-to-day work and context is the best way to transfer knowledge of complexity thinking and work ourselves out of a job, which at the end of the day is our goal. We guide people to experience new ways of working and create a safe space for everyone to speak up and share their opinion, even widely differing opinions. This often feels messy or uncomfortable as we're going through this process and the team is co-creating meaning and new patterns of communication. But that's how a team transfers knowledge to arrive at a common understanding. And by the end of the workshop, the team has something concrete they've all bought into to work on together. At a recent client, over a period of 16 hours in 4 remote sessions, we could see the conversation changing perceptibly. The group of people had turned into a much more cohesive team and appreciated differing opinions and even challenging old ways of doing things. By the end of the workshop, they were excited to take the next steps in their journey to agility that they had identified together as a team. And when leadership saw the workshop results, they were impressed with the team's ability to take on the challenge and improve their process. Leadership now trusts the team to do great work. We got feedback later on that the team is taking ownership of their day-to-day work in a way they had not done before. So now on to people and leadership. So the people and leadership facet is pretty involved, as you'll see now. In this facet, I'll cover what we at Adaptavist are focusing on for this people and leadership facet. Few would disagree that a workplace is nothing without its people. However, many organizations often end up focusing mostly on processes and tools instead of their people. In fact, people have been talking about the importance of an agile mindset for many years, but even as recently as May of 2020, Steve Denning, a well-known author and Forbes contributor with a book called The Age of Agile, said, "Is it possible that we in the Agile community have been putting too much emphasis on such an undefined and ambiguous term as mindset?" Well, we think the answer to this question is a resounding no. Conventional ways of thinking won't help us handle today's complex and changing world. If someone is to shift from a conventional thinking to an agile mindset, it's not just about training, right? It's not enough for someone to go through a Scrum or a Leading Safe class and think they've automatically got it and agile thinking is ingrained in their brain, even though they do have the all-important certificate. We have seen that doesn't work. So we got curious and we began to ask some psychologists about mindset. And we discovered the constructivist theory, which says that each person constructs their own meaning of the world and is influenced by the interaction of prior knowledge and new events. And it turns out that people actually tend to move through different stages of psychological development throughout their lives. It's a journey of personal growth that people undertake, and this determines the way we view the world. To uncover the stage of growth of an individual, the leadership development framework is one of the tools Adaptavists have been studying and testing inside our company and with our clients. Adults usually fall into conventional and post-conventional ways of thinking about the world, called action logics. The conventional way of thinking is what most people fall into. It's the frame of mind that's concerned with control, measurement, and prediction. If I had to correlate this with something, it's the belief that you can disassemble things into their component parts and put them back together again, maybe like a car or an airplane. And that means you believe you can control situations and it's possible to predict outcomes. Post-conventional thinking is a bit more rare. To correlate with the previous example, it's your understanding that situations are complex and interact in many different ways. You actually cannot simply disassemble and reassemble them. It's the understanding that the world is more like a living system, and most situations are actually impossible to predict and control. And even more, you begin to recognize your assumptions about the world. And guess what? We discovered that the post-conventional worldview looks very similar to an Agile mindset. By understanding an individual's profile, we can now guide them in their journey of personal growth. We do this via something we call dialogue partnering. It's our way of guiding people to a new mindset and leaving behind what doesn't serve them. However you decide to approach the Agile mindset inside your organization, it's something that cannot be ignored. Here are the other tools we use to uncover how people interact and collaborate in organizations. One, we run organizational network analyses to understand the social network, that is the informal network in the workplace, how folks interact. That informs us about what kinds of collaboration is happening naturally or not. Does the part of the network you're in support experiments and learning? Does it support failure? Secondly, we uncover the group's motivational orientation. So we measure how oriented individuals and groups are towards control or autonomy. The idea is if people have the right mindset, but they choose not to act, mindset doesn't matter. Autonomy is a fundamental human need, and we need to find ways to trigger and support it in the workplace. The third aspect is measuring employee engagement, which is related to organizational performance in a meaningful way. The research-backed Gallup poll 12-question survey finds that organizations with higher engagement have much lower absenteeism, lower turnover, and measurably higher productivity, sales, and profitability. This Q12 measures the actionable issues for management, those predictive of outcomes such as satisfaction, loyalty, pride, and so on. We actually worked with an organization that had dismal engagement scores, the lowest I had ever seen. And management now understood, after seeing those results, how the way they interacted with teams impacted their engagement and the company performance. With this information, leadership was invested to change the way they thought of their work and the team's work to enable a shift to a higher performing organization. On to the next facet, technical and cultural practices. So no one can deny that the delivery of valuable software relies on good technical and cultural practices. And you might be wondering right now why we're mixing the word technical with the word cultural. Why didn't we put cultural practices under people and leadership? Simply stated, these are practices that appear technical but are large culture shifts at the same time. And people won't start doing them if they go against the organizational culture. Let me give you an example. Test-driven development and pair programming are both things that appear to be a technical practice, but are actually big cultural shifts. Why should someone pair up with someone else if they're being rewarded for finishing tickets individually? Why should we do TDD if we're being pressured just to write code as fast as possible? To heck with quality. Even the idea of writing user stories is not only new for some people, but often runs contrary to the way people have viewed their work for many years. In many places, the culture or team structure simply won't allow teams to try new practices like behavior-driven development or test-driven development and other beneficial practices common to Agile. Furthermore, many of these things are counterintuitive. You say the team mobs on something and it'll get done faster and better than if one person works on it. That makes no sense to a lot of people. Agile promotes practices like collective code ownership, regular refactoring, etc. Many of these ideas are new to teams and leaders who are used to different ways of working. In fact, a VP once told me that if we allowed a tester to pair up front with a developer, something called pair testing, that the developer would find a way to sneakily code around the tester on purpose. So either leadership doesn't understand or know that teams should be doing these practices, or simply assume they'll learn it on the job. But I've rarely seen that to be true, especially in environments where teams are under pressure to deliver. Teams should be guided and supported to incorporate these practices in their day-to-day work. And that's why I wrote about this particular facet. In this one organization where we compared stories that were pair tested and not pair tested, the winner was clear. Stories that were pair tested had many fewer related defects, and all we had to do was add a flag in the tools validating that it had been pair tested. These kinds of experiments help validate assumptions on good practices. So maybe you're beginning now to understand how the people side of things is embedded in every single facet and how this concept can be used to unlock the promises of Agile. Also included in the team technical and cultural practices facet is the idea of teaming science, which is definitely a cultural shift for many people in organizations. Many companies still use project-based teams or randomly move people from team to team based on reorgs or priorities of the moment. The fact is that a great team can outperform by far a group of random people working on related work who don't work as a team. To be successful, teams must operate in emerging ecosystems amongst these complex situations and interactions and understand factors that lead to team effectiveness, such as clarity of mission and purpose, boundaries, conflict management, and diversity of thought. It's simply not enough to gather a group of individuals together and think if management leaves them alone, they're going to self-organize, they'll figure it out on their own, and there are no guarantees, actually, that team members won't stifle diversity of thought, handle conflict appropriately, or even be able to make healthy decisions. People on the team often don't have the basic criteria for success to be a team. So with an appreciation for teaming science, we can determine how effectively teams are working together and whether or not they have these conditions to be successful. So as you can see, there's so much to talk about in terms of teams and cultural practices. I haven't even scratched the surface. But once we understand the other three facets, trust me, we'll be much more successful at the last facet, tools and automation. So let's talk about tools, which after the other facets might seem like a much smaller thing to talk about, but not really. Tools are actually supposed to be enabling folks to do great work. But as you can imagine, tools and automation are implemented by humans who, well, they're people, and tooling and automation decisions are impacted by organizational culture and structure. You may have heard of Conway's Law. Organizations design systems that mirror their own communication structure. That usually means handoffs and hierarchies, and many disparate tools driven by decisions in different parts of the hierarchy and organization. Few companies look at tools holistically, instead viewing them as necessary evils that cost money. Well, tools are here to help you work better, not to dictate the way you work. Often when we're called in, we find that the tool configuration doesn't align with Agile ways of working. And sadly, when they're not set up right, collaboration is negatively impacted. Worse, the company has no way to find information it needs in order to make good decisions about strategy, priorities, or delivery. Tools should enable the pipeline of product delivery and improve the capacity for delivery. Even for tooling, we should be building in continuous improvement and learning. One team we worked with had to handle a lot of incidents when code was pushed to production, and they frequently had to roll back releases. They therefore had devised a 12-column Scrum board over some time. It included columns not only for the development work in progress, but also peer code review, senior code review, 3 kinds of QA testing. But there were still a high number of production incidents. So they decided they would hire a release manager to try to prevent things from being released in a bad state. Every time something went wrong, they added tools, processes, new steps, and people to manage and block rather than fixing the underlying problem, which was a lack of automated testing. No surprise, that wasn't going to help them succeed. So our approach to tools and automation is to perform discovery sessions so these challenges can be uncovered. We look at the goals, maybe speed up the release pipeline time by 10 times, for example, or the underlying issues, like the production incidents I mentioned, so we can unlock new capabilities inside the organization using the tools instead of looking at the tool like a solution. Metrics and measurement. Oftentimes we find that people don't even know what they should be measuring or how. Even worse, management doesn't even know what reports they want to see outside the team level or how it will help them or their customers. They fail to ask what decision the data will drive. This is a consistent issue I've seen over the past 10 years. And most companies want to know this information. They just don't know where to start, or they believe it's not possible when we're working in an Agile way. So we focus on flow metrics like cycle time, throughput, and time and status, and we look to improve key areas. Flow metrics are metrics that measure the flow of value through the value stream to customers instead of focusing only on portions of the work stream. After all, it doesn't matter how many story points you have in your sprint if it takes months to get something to a customer and you never close the feedback loop. Teams I have worked with over the years consistently avoid doing peer code reviews in a decent time frame. Sometimes when the code review had to happen outside the team, it could actually take weeks. By adding a custom field for time and status and adding a Slack notification after a customizable amount of times, we saw that teams greatly improve their cycle times on work items. It turns teams from being reactive to proactive. So at the end of the day, the right metrics, tooling, and automation can help an organization along on its continuous learning journey if you know what to measure and why it's important for your organization. So here's what I recommend. Tools are supposed to be enabling this automation of manual tasks. So leverage your tools to reduce unnecessary meetings that information in the tool could answer. I was able to, for example, automate away a hated status reporting meeting by using Jira to pull data into Confluence with custom fields. That meeting used to take almost 2 hours every other Friday and was hated by the 70+ folks who attended. That time was then able to be repurposed to help remove blockers. I know people who would duplicate all the team's work in spreadsheets for their own use, and one program manager told me it would take a solid 8 to 10 hours every other week to produce a report for his 5 teams. So take time to reflect with your team on ways to better utilize your time together and what would happen if you automated away as many manual tasks and meetings as possible. Tools are here to make knowledge work, which is invisible, visible. Look to uncover bottlenecks in delivery by analyzing wait times and work queues. So when you're setting up tools and exploring solutions, ask, who is the information for? What data do you want to see and why? What decisions will this information help drive? And perhaps what's the downside or unintended consequence of tracking this? There are so many things to consider in just the tooling aspect of Agile, but we need to wrap it up. So I've introduced you today to the 4 facets of agility: complexity thinking, people and leadership, technical and cultural practices, and tools and automation. These 4 facets have helped us think differently about Agile transitions and speak with people about needs and challenges they face in various areas of the business. The 4 facets align teams and leadership on both where we are now and where we'd like to be. And through workshops and discovery sessions, we identify clear next steps with our clients as a team instead of by executives dictating them. Work is done incrementally in a transparent way with purpose and clearly defined outcomes. And because of that, proper tools and processes are introduced together with everyone's buy-in and input. And because of that, the culture improves and everyone is aware of where we are and what's going on. This promotes autonomy of teams, increases productivity, raises engagement, and bakes in complexity thinking. We're applying these learnings in our organization and in our clients' organizations to help them develop what is called a deliberately developmental environment. We want folks to care about the work getting done, but also care about how it gets done, how folks interact with each other so we can unlock deep collaboration and engagement at work. A deliberately developmental environment has a culture in which everyone can overcome their own internal barriers to change and use mistakes and vulnerabilities as prime opportunities for growth. This kind of environment has problems we're trying to solve that are relevant, meaningful, complex, and take us just a bit outside our comfort zone. And when we do that, when we develop an environment like this, we find well-being increases, team performance increases, organizational performance increases, and people's experience at work is now more congruent with reality instead of being forced to continue to do things they know aren't working. And finally, the words continuous improvement and Agile aren't empty words anymore. They actually mean something, and the company culture and work reflects this. The journey is never over, but I hope having these concepts will help your company focus on the right areas while you're learning and growing. Again, my name is Heidi Araya from Adaptavist, and I really hope you've enjoyed this talk.
See there. Welcome. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
I must say as well, I'm particularly jealous of your backdrop. I'm assuming that you're somewhere in the US with a bit more of a tropical climate than over here in England.
I'm based in Orlando, Florida. So yes, it is probably much warmer here than there.
Nice, good stuff. Well, thanks for your time, Heidi, and thanks for the presentation. A really nice presentation at that, and it's great to have you along for a few questions as well, of which we have a few. So it would be great if we could just jump straight into it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So we actually ran a poll during your presentation, and the question asked was, does your company have a scaled Agile framework you are using? The majority of answers came back saying yes, custom framework we devised ourselves, and a few others, some using Scrum, Scale, or Nexus. And one of the answers, fortunately, that wasn't picked is no, we don't need to scale our practices. If an organization came to you and said we don't need to scale our practices, what would kind of your kind of reaction to that be, and what would you say to them in order to, you know, sway them the other way?
Well, actually, maybe I don't need to sway them the other way. The purpose of scaled Agile practices is basically to coordinate multiple teams across an organization. So if it's a small company, maybe they don't need to scale their practices at all. Or perhaps maybe the teams are working in a sort of autonomous manner where there aren't very many dependencies between and across teams, in which case the team working independently without scaling their practices at all might be fine. However, it's worth digging in, because what I've also seen is, and why I phrase the question that way is, maybe they just view it as a team level construct that management doesn't need to do anything else to change. So they're like, yeah, we're Agile. Why do we need to scale Agile? The teams are already doing their scrums and their daily meetings or whatever the case may be. And so that would definitely be an area where I would want to dig in. That's exactly what I found out in why I created the 4 facets is companies have either a mindset of we need to scale and maybe scale prematurely without considering the team level, or we don't need to scale at all because our teams are already doing this, these practices.
Sure, nice answer, thank you. The question here from the audience, Dan. Dan, thanks for asking. Dan said, hi Heidi, how do you overcome the data silo problem within organizations across departments and teams?
Great. I'd have to probably ask a lot more to understand the specifics of their particular scenario, but I would say, well, what is the goal of the data? Is everyone aware of why we need this data and information, and what kind of information are you looking for? So I would start with the goals. There might be data silos, but what would help the organization improve as a whole? Are we all on board with why we need that data and why it's important to get this holistically instead of just looking at it in silos?
Of course. Nice answer. And then with the 4 facets of agility, how have they kind of evolved over the course of the pandemic? Have they changed slightly? Have they? Is there more focus on one particular area? How have you kind of seen it progress over the course of the pandemic?
Great question. Actually, I haven't really seen that these change. What I have seen is that companies approach. They're like. What I would see is I would go into organizations and then they had installed SAFe, for example, or a scaled Agile framework, but they'd totally forgotten the team level. So the teams had no idea how to even work in this new way, and management just suspected that they already knew. So I was in the process of thinking about this starting in January of last year, based on the past 10 years of my experience, that I came up with this. And I have found that they hold true whether the organization is distributed or whether they're on-site and local. So that's been my experience that they hold true, and I haven't seen much change during the pandemic.
Sure. And then finally, kind of looking across different industries, what we find a lot of at this particular event is the different industries that come together all have common challenges in and around, you know, agile transformation. Is that true from your perspective? Are we seeing, you know, a widespread you know, across industries, are we seeing that widespread challenge, and is it one size fits all with regards to solution?
That is a great question. Yeah, again, this is kind of why I came up with the 4 facets, is because I had discovered these themes, right? So companies just viewed Scrum or their Agile as a team level process, and they didn't need to change anything. So I had, you know, I thought of people and leadership change. It's not just a process change. We need to think of the Agile mindset. How do we grow this? The tools and automation. Well, a lot of teams aren't even enabled with the tools and automation they need in order to be successful. And, you know, the same with the technical and cultural practices. I had companies come together and say, well, we're just going to, you know, randomly move people from team to team, put them together for this particular initiative, then disperse the teams. Well, that ignores the teaming science. So yeah, these are kind of based on the themes that I've seen in industries, and all of the 4 facets need to be kind of looked at and holistically in order for a successful transformation.